Hello, folks. I'm Jay Rajendran. I'm a product marketing manager at Firebolt. Today, we wanted to share some of our experiences from the field. This is from the field for the field and how customers look at Firebolt, how customers are using Firebolt. That's kind of what we wanted to get through today. I'm joined by 3 or 4 essays. This is a cast of characters here. They are a rowdy bunch, I can tell you that. They have their own opinions, and I'm supposed to be playing moderator with these folks. So having said that, let's go ahead and get quick introductions from them, and then we'll get started. Robert?
Hi, guys. I'm Rob Harmon. I'm one of the solution architects here at Firebolt. I've been here a year as of today, so there's a big day. Yeah, it seems like so much more than a year because we've gone through so many amazing things. Prior to coming here, I was in the consulting space, strangely with Chris. He used to be my boss once. Before that, I was out in the ad tech space as an individual contributor managing some really large data warehouse projects.
Right, over to you, Matt.
Yeah, it's Matt or Matthew Darwin, really don't mind which. Again, solution architecture with Firebolt. Been here for just starting my 9th month now. Prior to that, was also in consulting for a little bit on cloud data platforms. And before that, ran as head of data and DBA, primarily on SQL Server for quite a lot of companies around here in the Manchester area. So as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm from the UK, not from the US. So yes, that's Manchester where it rains rather than Manchester in the UK and the US.
By the way, the English accent provides so much credibility in tech. I have to say that. Chris?
Chris Onkupia, solution architect here at Firebolt. Been here a year and a half, so I guess I'm the elder statesman and can still tell you what to do, Rob. So before that, doing data engineer, data architecture, data warehouse, all that stuff for longer than my lack of gray hair may show.
Thank you, Chris. So I think I wanted to just start on a quick note, a soft thing. I know you guys are all very opinionated about stuff. I want to get your thoughts on where the industry is today, like from a cloud analytics standpoint, right? I know this is everybody, you're going to see a vast array of opinions, but I wanted to get your thoughts on it and how you see the landscape today. Any one of you can take this. Volunteers?
Who's going to jump first? I'll jump first. So typically, at the moment, when you look at the data landscape, you're going to come across modern data stack everywhere, and all you're going to see alongside modern data stack is logo after logo after logo after logo after logo of vendors and products, rather than actually thinking about the problems that people are trying to solve with data, getting back to the basics of data architecture. It's just, okay, what quick product can I pick off the shelf to solve this problem now and get moving forwards quickly? I think is the approach that a lot of people are trying to take. And that's where we then see these data stacks where people have 20, 25, 30 particular products in their stack, and it becomes slightly uncontrollable. And perhaps at the moment, there's becoming a bit of a backlash against that approach. It's kind of gets blamed on vendors rather than getting blamed on the people that are actually making the selections that the vendors are selling to. So I like to call it like easy mode. Somebody wants to just build an entire data platform without thinking about any of the problems that come up into building a data platform. That would be my take.
Okay. Anybody else?
I think Matthew's hit on one of the primary issues that we're facing today. I hate to age myself, but I remember the 90s and 2000s where things were manageable, and they're not anymore. And the differences are partially our products, but it's also we've forgotten a lot of the strategies that we used to take after data to make it as simple and manageable as possible. Rather than look at, the hard work of, I need to rebuild this schema because it just does not work for what I'm doing, we throw product at it. And then we end up with more spend. And the tough part about that is not only do we end up with more spend, but we just added a product which complicated our platform. So now we're going to go look for another product to solve the problem I just created with the last product. And this does stack up. I think to bring it back to Firebolt real quick, one of the things that Firebolt does is that efficiency allows us to simplify on so many levels. So if we embrace that, we can kind of collapse a bit of that product debt and get back to doing the jobs that we're built to do, to manage that data, to get that accuracy that we need.
So I like that, right? I think one of the follow-ups that I was going to have from Matthew was exactly that, right? It's like, by becoming another logo in that stack, are we compounding the problem, right? But you kind of preempted that, so I appreciate that. So my follow-up question is: so if that's the case, we are truly solving a problem. What is driving customers towards Firebolt, right? What are you seeing out there? So maybe we can start there.
Well, I wanted to step back a little bit. That's not saying there isn't a place for multiple tools. Like Firebolt does some things very, very well, like, finding the needle in the haystack or giving you aggregates. I mean, we're amazing there. But that's not to say we should replace Spark or something for that workload. But yeah, Matthew's right. It has gotten out of hand. You should have maybe 3, 4 data things in your platform, not 10. And to follow up with what Rob said, indeed, like half the time people look to new tech as an easy button when that's not an easy button, and it just makes it worse. We do see that a lot. People come to Firebolt, solve all of our problems. I think one of the main reasons I love working as an SA at Firebolt is that that's what we do. We work with you to solve your problems. Firebolt's part of that, but sometimes it's more than Firebolt, and we can take a fresh look at your whole stack and say, here's a different model. Have you thought about this? We're really nice, I promise. We don't just come and dictate and tell you what to do. But that's one thing I like. I'm not just here to set up Firebolt for you and run your query, right? We take a broader look at things and say, hey, where's the problem? Let's attack the problem, not just shove in a Firebolt in your stack.
So essentially, it becomes almost like you're meeting the customer where they are and essentially proving value, by just understanding their problems. I love that. That's great. So I guess going back to the key value prop that we typically talk about, right? Speed, scale, and efficiency, right? So let's talk about speed first. What have you seen out there in terms of your engagements? Specific results that you've seen. We don't have to mention competitors' names or other providers' names, but generally what you're seeing in terms of improvements that you've delivered.
It's really hard to say straight up, here's the number, because every engagement is going to be different. Your data set is not going to be like the guys next to you. So we're going to see a range of improvement on different workloads. And quite honestly, there's some workloads where we're not going to improve things, and that's okay. That's part of the game. Those workloads that we do see improvement on, we generally see anywhere from 10 to, what was the one we were talking about in Slack yesterday, Chris? We only made it to 80x faster. It's the best we could do. So it really depends on the workload. And in that case, 80x is probably not to be expected in most places. But that group had a really well-designed schema. It was logical, it was tight, they knew what they were doing, so it exploited product ability. It fell right in the wheelhouse, and off we go. And sometimes we don't have that. We published a recent blog article on an engagement I was in, where the best we can do is 10 to 15 second queries. But when you look under the hood on that engagement, it's an insane request. It's a massive amount of data. You're not going to make this happen instantly. So, we're normally a little squirrely when we get into 10-second queries, but when you compare it to the half hour it took on the previous platform, we're looking pretty good.
Yeah, that sounds good. Go ahead.
I think they're great points as well. I mean, the fastest that I saw was one that went from something that was taking like about 38 minutes down to being about 0.15 seconds, which was fantastic. And the reason for that was just down to what we win at, which is pruning. So rather than calculating this entire huge data set and then right at the very end limiting it down to the 50 rows they wanted to display in their app, we were focused on, let's get the 50 rows to begin with as soon as possible and then play those back. And it was, it's huge. That was just hilarious. We're kind of sat there like, and I'm like, can we compare the results? Can we make sure that this is right? There's something not right here. How can you go from that to this? I mean, it was a freak query. It's very, very specific to why we would do well in that space compared to how they were running things. But that's where it comes down to. And that's the benefit with Firebolt. We're looking at trying to process as little data as possible to get you your results as fast as possible. It's not magic. It's not like we're doing some thing where we're breaking the laws of physics or anything like that. It's just, let's process as few zeros and ones as quick as we can, as efficiently as we can, and return that for you. But yeah, on the flip side, you know, I've seen people saying, oh, I want this query to run sub-second to a mobile device in a dashboard, and then you look at the actual data result set for that query, and it's like, you know, 3 gigs of data, and you start having to quote connection speeds and speed of light to people and say, I think you need to either reassess the size of data that you're producing here, or have different expectations. It's just not going to work because of aforementioned speed of light.
Yeah, sometimes we do get customers on sales calls, right? That you get the POC and it's like, hey, I'm joining 1 billion to 100 million, no filtering at all, and tell me how fast I can go. 9 times out of 10, this isn't a real workload. It's somebody saying, hey, this is the test I'm going to have to really see what Firebolt can do. And I think that's, and then they're upset, right? They say, you guys promised sub-second response time. Like Matt's saying, there's limits to how fast electrons can travel, right? So where we excel, it generally tends to be the real use cases. Not saying there isn't. Like I said, 9 times out of 10, when you get those weird ones like that, it's just someone trying to, you know, hypothetically see what a software can do. But Firebolt tends to really focus on, what do? You look at data, and data by itself is meaningless, right? You're trying to get something out of the data. And that usually means either getting an aggregate view or looking at small subsets in order to find things that you need. And I think that's really, that's where Firebolt fits in on BI, on that, not running through the entire stack and joining giant tables. But in that 1 out of 10 where it is needed to do that giant thing, sometimes we just say, hey, well, why not just do this over here and pre-join it there? Or maybe there's a way we can filter things and look at it differently as well.
So that's cool, right? So I think there are a few things that I heard. One, I mean, it's real life use cases, right? You know, how we deliver value there. But at the same time, there's also needs to be realistic expectations, right? You know, we're not, you know, solving the speed of light problem. There are other things that we are focusing on from a data perspective. We're really efficient there, and that's what produces results. So I think that's something to remind customers of for sure. But I want to expand on that, right? You know, everybody talked about response time, but there's also other workloads that go beyond that. You know, one of the things that we talk about is concurrency, right? This comes up quite a bit. And what's your view on concurrency? What are you seeing there? How is Firebolt delivering there today?
So I've seen some really good concurrency numbers from Firebolt. And I think it's down to, again, it's down to that same point that because we're processing small chunks of data, there's an awful lot of small chunks of data that you can process at the same time. So if those query patterns are in that space where you kind of have, you know, multiple dashboard requests, say maybe it's like a finance exchange chart or so on, and the actual queries super fast because of the way that we're using our aggregating indexes to produce them. So they're taking 0.2 seconds or whatever it is, 0.15 seconds, pull that back. Then when you put that into a real workload and see what people are doing with their phones and how they're accessing it, and actually look at what those concurrency numbers really are in their application, there's usually quite a stark contrast between what our customer thinks it is and what their usage pattern of that concurrency really is. So we're at a point where we've got a query returning in 0.2 seconds, and the next query that comes in returns in 0.2 seconds. They think that's concurrent queries, and it's not. It's 2 sequential queries that are happening in the space of a second with 2 users hitting a button slightly differently at that point in time. We get them out the door fast enough that actually concurrency is not even an issue anyway. But then, you know, we do have tools where we throw thousands of queries simultaneously at Firebolt to see how it works. Maybe not thousands, but hundreds of queries at Firebolt and see how it works and see where those latency periods come in. And if you hit a bottleneck on a single engine at that point, you can scale. You can add more nodes to your engine, or you can add more engines to service those different workloads. And so from a concurrency perspective, there's a lot of tools that we've got to work with. One is make the queries fast enough that actually you're not even having concurrency anymore when you look at what your users are really doing, and then look at those scaling options to move from there.
So what I heard is, I mean, obviously the efficiency side of things actually does make a difference, right? If you're inefficient, then you're relying on crutches like auto scaling and all that stuff from a concurrency perspective. Maybe you don't need those things, right? So if you're really, really, truly efficient, it just changes the game quite a bit. So that's cool. So my dog's going crazy. I don't know if you guys can hear him or not, but I don't know. He just chose the right time here. But let's switch gears a little bit, right? So we talked about performance. Let's talk about efficiency, right? How customers are looking at efficiency. I think there's a lot of focus in the industry on cost itself, right? Where do you see Firebolt from an efficiency perspective, cost, processing, and all that?
Well, it's always a difficult dance trying to figure out where you want to be on that, how many knobs you want to have and how many things you want to tweak versus how much you want it to be the easy button. I know as we've matured as a company, we've gone kind of around and around on that. Some people want to just throw anything at it, not think about indexes, not think about anything, and just have it come back fast. Other people really like to be able to turn the knobs, get under the hood, see exactly how it's working, and get the absolute most out of their database. I would say generally try to be kind of in the middle. You have some, you said not to mention names, but you have some technology where you're in there, you're all the way down to choosing how the storage engine is going to interact, and you're really having to set up everything. And then we have some other well-established, well-polished databases that really, you can throw anything at it. These tend to be very expensive. These tend to be cheaper. I would say we're kind of in the middle. Like, we should be able to throw things at it and have it come back and at least match, if not beat, our competitors. But then if you put in a little extra time and work, then you can also be faster. But yeah, in general, having a few more knobs than some of our competition is what allows you to be cheaper. So especially, for example, choosing the type of EC2 instance that we're running on, whether it's compute focused or RAM focused. Almost all my customers that I've ever sat there and profiled and done all the things and picked the exact right engine, working with them, have not chosen the balanced option. We have a balanced option, which is kind of like jack of all trade, master of none. There is like two that I can think of that do use balance, but almost all of them, their patterns fall into a certain area that either needs more RAM or needs more compute, like JSON needs a lot of compute, for example. And so that's one way I think that we can be more cost effective than some of our biggest competitors, is really providing the right machine for their problem.
Yeah, I'm thinking of an example that we just had recently with a customer. They were having, it's a concurrency question. They had a particular query that they run that is quite expensive in terms of RAM on the machine, and it takes one run of that query takes about a quarter of the RAM available. So if you run 4 of those concurrently, they hit an error, they had an out of memory issue on the engine that they were running on. But because we have those different suites of engines available, we pointed out to them and say, hey, we could go and we can tune this query some more, we can do all of this stuff, which is cool. Or there is a switch here that we can just switch your engine from being a compute optimized engine to a RAM optimized engine, and the difference in cost is 10 cents an hour. So let's just do that, right? Rather than spend any more effort on it, because that's going to cost you time, that's going to cost you money, it's effort that you could be doing something else, and we can switch you over to something that's 10 cents extra an hour, and now you can run 8 of those queries because it's got double the RAM. And you've analyzed your workload, you never ever see 8 of those running concurrently ever. So right. There we go.
I think there's more to it though than just Firebolt. I think Firebolt opens up other opportunities for efficiencies that are difficult to achieve on other platforms. If your queries are running slow, or if your BI platform is not achieving the performance that your consumers want, what do? We fire up some piece of, some kind of third-party app that creates a summary table out of our base table to make it go faster. Well, now there's a new use case that's kind of based on that last use case. Now we end up with a pipeline on a pipeline on a pipeline. We've all seen this. All of that starts to accumulate more debt. Now, not only do I need all of these pipelines to make my end users happy, now I got to keep track of all these pipelines. So now there's more need for man hours looking into things like lineage and data quality. And this manpower explosion happens at that level. And I think Firebolt is a really interesting platform in that I can get that speed on the raw table. I can toss an aggregating index out in like 2 minutes and the end user is happy. And there's no secondary pipeline. There's no, update anomalies that happen because I did summarization. There's all of that stuff that wakes the pager guy disappears. And I can put my engineers back to doing something that's revenue generating rather than chasing the pager. I personally think that's a pretty cool trick.
Yeah, Firebolt's a lot cheaper per hour than people, right? We get some customers that are like, I got to be $2 an hour. I'm like, well, that's.
I use it as a joke, but it turned out not funny. Can you find me a data engineer? They're all gone.
And they're a lot more than $2 an hour.
What was the post that you
Tell me
were
about
talking
it.
about today? Was it pineapples versus data engineers? What's the difference? I was like, let's just put pineapples on seats. That's such a weird thing to say.
So, see, you guys bring up some really important points. I just want to recap a few things that I heard, right? I think, one, I think the granularity of provisioning is important. At the same time, you have that control that you get, right? On certain platforms, you may not get that. You end up overspending because of that. You're inefficient. Then there's the people aspect of it, right? The people aspect of it, if I can move certain logic into the database and that completely simplifies the process, I save money. But there's another side to it as well, right? I think operationally as a SaaS platform, I think, we're different, right? It helps as well. So I wanted to explore that a little bit on the productivity front. So, what skills do you need to get started on in a Firebolt? So, I'm walking off the street. And the question is, what do I need? What do I need to have? Go ahead.
It's surprisingly straightforward. It's underneath all of this glitz and glamour, it's a SQL engine. It does SQL. If you know SQL, we're on a good start. Now, unlike some platforms, we've reintroduced the idea of index. So there's a little learning curve there. We've got 3 basic index types. And one of them is very, very physical. This is how we're going to order every table, a primary index. Then we have aggregating indexes, which seem simple at first, but then once you start getting inventive with them, they can get really exciting. And really all that does is it allows us to manage aggregates in a real-time fashion for the end user. So they don't have to build those pipelines. They don't have to build materialized views, all that noise. And then the third one we've got is a join index. And if you're old like me, this is not a new trick. Join indexes work like covering indexes do in Oracle or SQL Server, or it's the same exact thing. So it's not really exciting from, the developer perspective, but from an operational perspective, these things get really neat if you apply them in the right place. Again, to, the manpower issue, we're denormalizing all of our lookups because joins are hard on other platforms. Well, we have join indexes, so we don't have to do that. We see a query that's joining something and it's slow, we just toss out a join index, call it a day. But that learning process, that learning curve is really low barrier. If you can spend 3 hours with me, I can explain this, turn you into a pro.
Yeah,
Perfect.
I remember when I started being pretty intimidated, like the 2 guys that came before me on the team, one came from AWS, another one came from Imply with Druid. They were asking lots of questions, like detailed stuff in the interview, and I was like, oh no, I'm not going to get the job. I really want this job. But then when I got in, and I had come from Azure, Postgres, even some Oracle, I came from that world. But yeah, like 2 weeks later, I was running my own POCs and doing work on Firebolt. I remember the day I was like, wait a minute, it's still just SQL. The approach is a little bit different, and you can do some cool things with column-based databases that you couldn't do with row-based. and that nature. But generally, at the end of the day, if you know SQL and you know how to structure data, you can do Firebolt. That's the key thing, really understanding data.
But I guess that's the skill set that's been disappearing, right? Understanding data
Totally.
and understanding data modeling is disappearing. So, you know, that there is an element of, yeah, do your homework on data models. Go and read some books written in the 80s about data modeling, because there's not how much there's a lot of this stuff solved problems in terms of the modeling, in terms of why you do the things that you do. So, you know, go read some of those books, read some of the later books, then kind of follow it through from a historical perspective. Whereas I think there's a whole lot of people that started being a data engineer in, like, say, 2012, 2013, have never worked with databases. They've never worked with relational models. They do all the stuff in Scala. They think that's how data engineering and processing works. And they're doing all kinds of hoop jumping to get through dealing with immutable files in cloud storage objects and all this kind of stuff to produce their pipelines. And actually, you don't need to worry about that if you can sort your model out to begin with. So yeah, I mean, I guess there is an element of upfront design with Firebolt, but then when you're looking at what you're doing with Firebolt with your database, you also get us guys there helping you to do that. Or if you're lucky, you get Rob or Chris.
Yeah, a year ago, I had a customer, for example, it was a major retailer, and they brought us their dashboard, right, and said, Ed, help us. Half the improvements we made were not because of Firebolt. I said, here, go run this on your Redshift. They ran on the Redshift. Their time's cut in half. Good news is their time's cut down to 20% or less on all queries by going to Firebolt. So they're like, well, if we're going to do this lift in Redshift, we might as well lift and shift it to Firebolt at the same time. But yeah, there's a lot of things you can do just by taking a fresh look. And it was nothing, you know, amazing, no crazy tricks with indexes, nothing. It was just having a function in the where clause. That's all. That's all it was, so that it can't use an index because it was destructive and couldn't use that to filter. So there is a little bit of a lost art. I know Rob and I talk about this a lot in evenings with beers in hand. There is a little bit of a lost art, but it is exciting to see the industry overall swinging more towards data engineer. It was probably, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, everything wanted full stack. And then people realized, like, well, wait a minute, you know, there's skill sets we want in each area. No one can be a master of everything, just like the balanced engine, right? Jack of all trades, master of none. That's what you get. So it is exciting to see kind of the weight put on data engineering right now. So also data science got really big, and that stole a whole lot of people out of data engineering because they go, oh, this is the new cool thing. So that's partly how we got here too.
I have to admit, I'm thrilled to death that I'm seeing trends on social media that data engineering is now in vogue. My favorite is to see modeling has returned finally. We're getting a lot of press around modeling, and being a former data architect, this is great. Although I did have a moment where I thought, I told you so.
A moment, just a moment.
Maybe a few moments.
I think you say that to me daily, Rob. Come on.
I've been trying very hard to keep him off the soapbox. I don't want him getting on it again. But,
I'm trying, man.
So a couple of things. What I realized about this entire conversation, the last piece, is that you guys are such purists, right? You know, but I think what you're pointing out is that the fundamentals do matter. If you do the right things up front, there's a lot of less pain afterwards. And I think that the industry as a whole, I think in some ways it's been forgotten, right? In some ways it goes back to that chasing the next new tool or the next new aspect, because you're so scared of the big data problem, you forget the basics sometimes. You know, I do believe that. But anyway, so, you know, good points on that, right? Obviously, you know, transitioning to Firebolt would be SQL skills, you know, data modeling, fundamental stuff, right? I mean, you should have that. You know?
Yes, and data modeling is no more important on Firebolt than it is on any other product. Yeah. It's just that we're kind of in a strange world as SAs where we're really trying to help that customer, whether they're on Firebolt or not. We want them to go fast, so we often engage the data model, and sometimes it works for us. Sometimes we make it go so fast that they don't need Firebolt anymore. Now, that doesn't happen very often, but it does happen, and that's okay.
And sometimes it's not people's fault. A lot of times what
Yeah.
we see happen is they set up a very good model in the beginning, then someone makes a change. Often, they're changing on their BI tool. They're not realizing that the BI tool is completely changing the way it writes the SQL. And then all these little changes to BI tool over time. That's why I'm a big proponent of like once a year taking an audit of your data stuff and just taking a look at it instead of continuously adding new features, adding new things, new dashboards, new widgets. Just kind of take a tune up, I guess you could say, at least once a year. Once a quarter would be better.
All right. So again, switching gears a little bit. I know this is something that Rob mentioned earlier, right? One of the things that you said was ad tech before. I think that's your background. I guess my question is, we've seen a lot of the ad tech customers basically leverage Firebolt, right?
Right.
Why is that the case, right? What is so difficult about that problem?
It's big. so there's two issues that I ran into in 20 years. Well, maybe 3 or 4. I'll start with a couple issues that I ran into in the ad tech space. So what was it, about 20 years ago, I joined an ad tech startup. I didn't know the first thing about ad tech other than this is where all the data is. So me being the egotist I went chasing it. And it's an interesting problem because of the volume and the market. So data volumes are always increasing. The internet expands. That means more ad views, more ad clicks, etc. At the same time, CPVs, which you're getting paid for moving ads, is constantly dropping. This has been true for 20 years. So CPVs have dropped from $1.30 to 80 cents. So I'm making these numbers up, but you get the idea. So if you're an ad tech provider, this gets to be a very, very difficult game because the data is increasing, but the value of each row of data is constantly decreasing. So now we need to be very, very proactive about data ROI. And this doesn't sound like a huge issue when you're dealing with just terabytes of data. You can work your way through this. When you've got 5 petabytes of data coming in every month and you're distilling this down to a petabyte every month, that compute is massive. And so you really do have to dial in on the ROI of every stinking row and every query to meet that demand because your margins are dead thin. So you're constantly watching. If you're a data warehouse architect in this world, believe it or not, you're spending more time watching your financials than you are actually the data warehouse because we've got to make this all work. And that's where Firebolt can come in and help a lot. We run into trouble in the ad tech space. One of those things is analyzing click streams. I know Chris has done this before. We've talked about it. Analyzing click streams in SQL Server back in the day was brutal because there's no way. You've got 1 million, views of an ad. You've got another million, well, probably 800,000 clicks. You've got 2,000 conversions. And now I need to find all of the impressions that became clicks, that became conversions. But worse, I need to find all the conversions that didn't have a click or an impression because those are click fraud. So now I'm joining this huge clickstream table, this billions and billions and billions of rows to itself 3 times to find my answer. Well, that is an impossible ask for most platforms to do efficiently. In Firebolt, we were playing around with it. I was just doing it not because I'm working for ad tech, but because it seemed like a perfectly good thing to throw out Firebolt and see what happens. Matthew saw it. I did some quick aggregating indexes over an array and crushed that down to a single select, no joins. Everything's back real time, instantly. It reduces the cost of that query by thousands-fold. And that can affect an ad tech business. And that's likely why they're drawn to it. I went too far.
No, that's cool. I think this is important, right? See, look, I mean, the massive volumes of data and the processing complexity, you got that, right? I think, we're there. But, then you have the other extreme of customers who basically say, hey, you know what? We're not an ad tech. We are not an ad tech business. What I have is my 200 gig, Postgres database, and we're going to have some analytics, right? So I guess my point is, I think in ad tech, obviously from a big data perspective, we have some technology that's a great fit. What do you say to the other customers, right, who are on the other end of the spectrum?
the customers I found that go that way are usually just because how easy it is. They're sometimes coming from on-premise. They have to go buy new hardware, upgrade things, or even some of the older cloud technologies, and they're just like, oh, really? I can just change that in a click. And they're excited because most of the time they have big dreams, right? No one's going to be like, hey, 200 gig forever, right? They usually plan on growth, as they should, and plan for growth. And so they like Firebolt for that part of it.
Yeah, but also there's other things as well that come into play as well. I mean, if you're looking at that 200 gig of data, Firebolt's going to compress that really well. So it's going to shrink down to like 20, 30, 40 gig, maybe something like that. And you can start running this on a really small, cheap engine. Like I said, we've got customers that are running stuff on maybe like, $1.30 engine, and they could load their entire data set into that engine. They can query any query that they can think of on that engine, and it'd be fast. Whereas taking that cost elsewhere, looking at how you would run that on something else, will be more expensive. So not only is it just that it's easy, it's quite often really is coming into that kind of cost effectiveness, I think, from within Firebolt. And an example of that would be, I've worked with customers that look at using, say, serverless technologies to do their querying. And they start off and they chuck a load of Parquet files into cloud storage. They're then running a query engine over the top of it, and they immediately will not get a query that runs faster than 2 seconds. With that particular technology, it's just not going to work. It's going to be about 2 seconds, which is fine. And they run that query once a day. Cool, brilliant. Then they stick a dashboard over the top of it, and now they're running that 2-second query 10, 20, 30 times an hour. And each time they run it, they're paying by the scan. And all of a sudden, this starts to add up, and they haven't optimized it. They haven't thought about how they partition their data and structure it to reduce the size of those scans and all that kind of stuff. So it starts to add up. So at this point, you now have to refactor, and then you can take that whole thing and say, well, we're going to run it at $1.30, $1.40 an hour. You're going to have this engine up for 8 hours a day. So you're at like $10, $12 a day running costs for this. It's actually quite a compelling sort of argument, I think, for going forward with those small use cases as well. So yeah, Firebolt is going to do really well with the big stuff, but because it does well with the big stuff, it's also going to do really well with the small stuff, and we allow you to scale accordingly.
So good for the big stuff in terms of the bigger problems like the ad tech, which is hard to solve. And then even from a business perspective, right? If your margins are decreasing in a year, you have to focus on the data more. I like that data point. And then obviously the smaller stuff, ease of use, getting it going, compression, all these things add up as well. So that's cool in terms of what we deliver. There is one thing that you did mention. I want to go back to that, Matthew, which is basically you talked about almost like a data lake with a Parquet file and being able to do a federated query engine. You contrasted that, but I want you to expand on it a little bit more, because I think one of the things that we see typically is like conversation around a data lake or even a Delta lake, right? Yeah. And the expectation is the Delta lake is going to deliver that, sub-second query performance. What are you actually seeing there?
Yeah, so Delta Lake is, it's a fantastic approach to dealing with a problem. So if you were in cloud storage, you have immutable files, and they're usually going to be Parquet files because that's what people write there. And if you're using Delta Lake specifically, will have to be, because that's Spark, and it's actually just using Parquet files under the hood. And all it's really doing is adding that DML semantics to immutable files. So if I do an update in my file, what actually happens is I rewrite the file. This is what happens under the hood. So I now have 2 files in the same place. So double the volume there and so on. And then when I come to actually doing my reading from that, there's a manifest and a log that points to which are the current files to go and read from. So in that space, we've had a customer who have embraced Delta Lake. They're using it for, I think they're using the Spark structured streaming for that. They've got a lot of stuff coming in for their kind of silver tables, as they call them. It's great. They then wanted to have dashboarding on top of it. And this is where, with that particular tool that they were using, the cache was great. They were getting good query performance. But as the changes come into their tables, and this is the entire point of Delta Lake in the first place, as those changes came in, it invalidated the cache, and their query performance dropped from like 2 seconds to 30, 40 seconds for that query. Because the first thing that had to be done is go back to S3, find out which are the current files, load those back into cache, now run my report. And that was no good for them at all. So when we took Firebolt for them, started looking at that, we had some challenges to overcome because at this point we don't have a direct Delta Lake connector. So we're viewing all of the files in that partition to load into Firebolt. So we did a bit of work with that, actually using the manifest file there, using that to join directly to the files, which was great. Load that in. Really fast performance, and now all of those queries are fast even with the updates that they were having. So they're keeping their update latency as they were expecting going, but now all of the queries are in the kind of 0.1 to 0.3 second query bracket, and their dashboards are all lightning fast. So that's the space that they've gone into. So it's just, it's taking that existing great technology. Spark is brilliant, data lakes, I think, are a great thing, for having a repository of all your data. There's nothing wrong with taking some data and dumping it there, so long as you know what you're dumping and why you're dumping it there. Dump it there. But if you don't have the downstream use case just yet, that's okay. Kind of keep it there. But as soon as you're going to start to want to use that, you're going to want to do something with it, and that's where Firebolt really comes in. So yeah, I mean, Firebolt can play perfectly nicely in that lakehouse architecture over the top of a Delta Lake or a data lake. I've not looked at Iceberg yet. I need to pull Iceberg out and check how that works, but it's going to be the same kind of thing because it's the same problem that immutable files are. Guess what? Immutable, so you can't do updates and deletes on them. So at some point, it's just writing a new file out. You need to load that in. We'll be able to handle that with Firebolt and roll forwards from there.
Cool. That is really cool, actually, right? I think, there's a lot of, customers are looking at these technologies, right? So it's great to hear that, there's an option from a Firebolt perspective along with the Lakehouse architecture. That's cool. I only have a couple more questions real quick. So if a customer is starting to, go down the Firebolt route, right? How would you help them navigate that, right? They're new, they're coming in, right? What is the typical approach from an SA standpoint? How do you guys approach it? Do I pick a person? Chris, let's go.
How we approach it at Firebolt right now, I'm not saying this will always be the case, but right now we do very hands-on. So one of the concerns, for example, we get from a lot of our customers is like, I can't go Google and find if something breaks in Firebolt. So already right there, that means, we are their Google, we are their Stack Overflow, we are whatever, right? So as I say, we take a very hands-on approach right now. And it really depends on the customer, right? Like I said, you said we have the 200 gig. We have people coming from Postgres on premise. We have people coming from Athena. We have people coming from all over the place, right? So they have completely different background, completely different expectations with Firebolt. So what we do right now, well, first step is find out, is Firebolt a good fit for them? We don't want to spend all that hours that we spend working with them if right away we can tell, like, hey, this isn't the best technology for you. There are times we will recommend other things if it's not the right fit. Then we go through a POC process. Of our team, none of us likes, sorry, marketing, we don't like throwing out a slide that says 600x improvement, all that stuff. We hate that stuff. We take the customer's data, we load a potential customer's data directly onto our servers in 95% of the time. And then we run some queries either provided by the customer. That's the ideal, but sometimes customer doesn't really know, like it's a new work load that they haven't done before. And then we write some queries so that there's no hiding, right? And we show you, this is what it's running. This is what it looks like with your data. Yeah, that's a lot of work. That's why the three of us on this call, plus half a dozen more, are very busy folks, but we believe it's the best approach. There's no hiding. And when you're paid by the hour, most of the time, you can't hide anyway, right? So if we do all this work and somebody says, yeah, I like Firebolt, there's no dotted line to sign on saying, here's my 5-year contract, or whatever you're paying by the hour. So this is what works for us right now.
Anybody else?
I think it's great as well when you do those playback sessions and you actually see this is my queries on my data and it looks like my data, and hang on a minute, I'm comparing these results to my dashboard that takes 40-50 seconds to load, and you've run that query and you've got the same results there in second, sub-second, whatever it is. It's really cool. The response to that is always very positive. And then the other thing that it does as well is it's a step forwards for getting that workload into production. So it helps us and it helps the customer. It's a win-win situation. We're at a point where we can say, here's all of what we did. Here's the code that we built for you. You can take this and roll forwards with it and start to implement it and actually really reap the benefits, which is cool. So I think it's a great process. I think it's really cool. It's not always easy. We sometimes get some odd challenges. We'll have to rework things around in order to make it work, but it's pretty cool. I mean, I had one where the POC was one query and it was to build the results for a data model, a data science training model, and it took like 30 minutes in Firebolt, and that was the best I could do with this query. But I was processing it over a range of data that was like 200 or 300 times larger than they'd ever been able to run before. And so it was like, okay, it takes 30 minutes. Sorry, guys, I wanted to get it faster, but you've never done this before. It just doesn't work on anything else that you did. They were going from like producing a model where it was an hour's worth of data to now we can produce a week's worth of data for the same in exactly the same way. So yeah, it's cool. It's a fun process.
I love those, Matthew. Every so often, I just had one recently. I said, look, guys, I can only squeeze this down to 3 seconds. It's the best I can do. What's your current query runtime? Well, it's impossible now, so I guess we'll go with yours.
I have had customers like give me fake numbers before, like here's what it was, and then we show them and I'm like, I'm sorry, we barely squeaked out above the numbers you get now. And then they're like, that's okay, we made up those numbers, you crushed it. And I was like, oh, come on, guys.
in this case, it was real data. It's just that it was so big they couldn't push it to production anywhere else, so they came to Firebolt and I gave it a shot, and I guess that'll work. But yeah, sometimes that you ask how much improvement can we get. Sometimes we start with impossible and get good, not necessarily great. The jump from impossible is a little tough.
Sounds good, guys. This is really good. I mean, we covered a lot of different topics, right? And I really want to thank you guys for jumping in and sharing your experiences. So my last question for you guys. Nothing data engineering related. Your favorite 80s music album or group?
Oh,
what did he ask?
Anthrax.
I'm probably going Sonic Youth. Probably.
Oh, wow.
Cool. And Chris?
He's too young to remember
I don't
the 80s.
know. I did listen to, I shouldn't be ashamed to say it, but I did listen to a lot of Depeche Mode. I like them a lot. And I listened to like U2. I mean, even though it was overplayed at the time, when I go back now and listen to like Joshua Tree, I'm like, it doesn't sound 80s, and just some of the things there. So at least 80s U2. I don't know about current YouTube, but sorry guys if you're watching.
I love it. I love this because I think you get a very diverse group, cross continent, diverse music preferences. I love this. So on the Depeche Mode note, right? I'm going to finish this up. Let's enjoy the silence. Thank you very much for joining, guys.